It's strange to think that in the United States alone, over 40,000 bodies have been discovered that remain unidentified, many of them murder victims. Simply put, nobody knows who they are, or were. This could be for a variety of reasons. Their fingerprints may have been destroyed, their faces damaged beyond recognition, no DNA could be matched, or, in some depressing cases, nobody came forward to identify the body, leaving them forgotten. This Wikipedia page lists, by state, merely a fraction of these unknown murder victims, detailing how they were killed, what parts of them are still missing, and as much information as is known about them. What really unsettles me as I scroll down the page, though, are the reconstructed images of what these people may have looked like when they were living, breathing humans. These pictures don't quite make it to the other side of the uncanny valley, and they give off an air of creepiness. The fact that the people they depict don't have real names either adds to that. Odessa Jane Doe, Valentine Sally, LA County John Doe, One-Eyed Jack. They were once just like us, now, through these images, more like ghosts. In a sense, these are real people that we're looking at, but at the same time, without an actual picture or name, they aren't. The thought that we might die and be forgotten about is disturbing in itself. Humans want to feel significant, like our lives mean something. Going through this page challenges that, and while reading about each case, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loneliness. How about you? You know you're in for a hard read when you open this page, and the first thing you see is a photo captioned, "Rosemary Kennedy during 1938, 3 years before her lobotomy." Rosemary Kennedy was the sister of President JFK, and the daughter of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Due to oxygen deprivation during her birth, Rosemary suffered from learning difficulties. By the time she reached adulthood, she possessed an IQ of about 60 or 70, which is roughly equivalent to an 8 to 12-year-old. Despite this, Rosemary enjoyed a relatively normal upbringing, though her family covered up her mental condition, and nobody outside of her immediate family knew of her low IQ. As she matured, her previously easygoing and calm demeanor shifted, likely due to frustration. It must have been difficult struggling to achieve the same high standards her siblings were held to, and that were expected of her too by her high-status parents. She started becoming rebellious, strong-willed, a problem for her father's political career. Joseph Kennedy Sr. decided to risk a new neurosurgical procedure that his doctors assured him would make his daughter calm again and eliminate her outbursts. In other words, reduce the chances that she would publicly embarrass him. As the picture before suggests, that procedure was a lobotomy. A lobotomy involves scraping or cutting out parts of the brain. The procedure had only been performed 80 times in the USA at that point, but despite the risks, Joseph Kennedy Sr. had Rosemary tied to an operating table. One of the doctors described what happened next. "We went through the top of the head. I think she was awake. She had a mild tranquilizer. I made a surgical incision in the brain through the skull. It was near the front. It was on both sides. We just made a small incision, no more than an inch." The instrument Dr. Watts used looked like a butter knife. He swung it down to cut the brain tissue. "We put an instrument inside," he said. As Dr. Watts cut, Dr. Freeman put questions to Rosemary. For example, he asked her to recite the Lord's Prayer, or sing God Bless America, or count backwards. We made an estimate on how far to cut based on how she responded. When she began to become incoherent, they stopped. If you couldn't guess, the procedure was a monumental failure. Rosemary was left with the mental age of a 2-year-old child and could no longer communicate or even walk, and lost control of basic bodily functions. She was institutionalized and disowned by her family, who refused to visit her or even publicly acknowledge where she had disappeared to. As one Reddit user wrote, "In a way, it's even sadder that she lived to be 86, effectively trapped in a shell." A physical injury is one thing, but to have your mind, your entire personality taken away from you, your free will effectively crushed, all on your father's orders, that's something else. Unit 731 was a Japanese research unit which conducted human experiments on prisoners of war during World War II. Victims were treated like lab rats by the researchers and were often infected with various diseases. They were then cut open while still alive without any form of anesthetic. The surgeons would remove their organs while they were still conscious to inspect how the diseases affected the human body. This took place on both adults and children. Test subjects would sometimes have their limbs amputated while still conscious, and then reattached to the opposite side of their body. Others had their limbs frozen to examine the spread of gangrene and how it rotted the flesh. Unit 731 developed biological weapons and helped spread the bubonic plague across much of mainland China. They also tested weapons on civilians as well, such as flamethrowers and grenades. Subjects were starved, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays. The list goes on and on. If you can imagine it, then the researchers probably tried it on some poor soul. Approximately 250,000 people were killed in excruciating ways as a result of Unit 731's experiments, many of the victims infants. But at least the monsters involved saw justice after the war, right? Well, no. In return for their human experimentation data, the researchers of Unit 731 were given immunity by the US. Accounts made by survivors were, at the time, dismissed by the West as communist propaganda. This page reminds us of the horrific acts that humans are capable of performing when they're able to dehumanize others or view a specific group as inferior. You might want to skip this one if you're eating. Tarrare was a Frenchman known for his unusual eating habits. And yes, any of my French-speaking listeners are allowed to mock my pronunciations during this one. Essentially, Tarrare had an insatiable, never-ending hunger. In fact, he was unable to stop himself. Descriptions of him state that he had a creepily wide mouth, full of stained teeth, with lips so thin they were effectively invisible. Strangely, even though he could reportedly eat his own body weight in meat over the course of a single day, he never seemed to gain any weight. Instead, his stomach would balloon after a large meal, and over time return to normal. That in itself seems almost impossible, but numerous medical professionals at the time documented his case, as well as several others like him. Nothing like it has been recorded since, making his condition very specific to this period of history. Tarrare was such an unusual case that doctors would conduct tests on him to find out how he was able to consume so much. It wasn't just the fact that he could eat so much food though. He could literally consume anything. He would sneak around, drinking blood and eating dead human flesh. The following quote shows just how disturbed he was, both physically and mentally. Tarrare was presented with a live cat. He tore the cat's abdomen open with his teeth and drank its blood, and proceeded to eat the entire cat, aside from its bones. before vomiting up its fur and skin. Following this, hospital staff offered Terrer a variety of other animals, including snakes, lizards and puppies, all of which were eaten. He also swallowed an entire eel without chewing, having first crushed its head with his teeth. In another hospital, doctors eventually gave up on their tests and got rid of him, after a 14-month-old baby went missing from the hospital, and Terrer was the main suspect. Terrer died in 1798. He came to his doctor, Monsieur Tessier, saying that he had eaten a golden fork 2 years earlier, which he was sure had lodged inside his body somewhere, and was slowly killing him. In reality, it was tuberculosis that killed him. The corpse rotted quickly. The surgeons of the hospital refused to dissect it. Tessier, however, wanted to find out how Terrer differed from the norm internally, and was also curious as to whether the golden fork had actually lodged inside him. At the autopsy, Terrer's gullet was found to be abnormally wide, and when his jaw was opened, surgeons could see down a broad canal into the stomach. His body was found to be filled with pus. His liver and gallbladder were abnormally large, and his stomach was enormous, covered in ulcers, and filled most of his abdominal cavity. The fork was never found. There have been some popular YouTube videos made about the disturbing incidents that have taken place at Disney World. Since 2001, Disney has been obligated to report any incidents to state authorities, meaning any injuries, deaths, or serious crimes. Even though you've likely heard about a few of them already, when you check out this Wikipedia page, the list of incidents goes on for much longer than you'd probably expect, and far too long for comfort. Some notable entries include an 8-year-old boy who was crushed under the wheels of a Disney transportation bus in 2010, a 4-year-old boy drowning in the moat around Cinderella's castle, and, of course, the recent alligator attack that killed a 2-year-old child along the Seven Seas Lagoon beach. Though the majority of incidents on the list aren't explicitly Disney's fault, it's still unnerving to think that the happiest place on Earth has been the setting for so many tragedies. I'm not sure if you've heard of serial killer Albert Fish, but he was one truly disturbed individual. He would lure children to isolated locations, and then, using what he called his implements of hell, namely a meat cleaver, a handsaw, and a butcher's knife, would torture, mutilate, and murder them. He would then indulge in cannibalism, eating their raw flesh. The most chilling part of this page, however, is the unedited letter that he wrote to the mother of one of his victims, 10-year-old Grace Budd. He had met the family before, and had actually planned to capture and kill their son, but when he saw Grace, he switched his target. The letter reads as follows. Dear Mrs. Budd, on Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester which I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wild flowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I'd get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. How she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death, and then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it and eat it. Took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I've left out some details which I didn't find appropriate for the channel. If you're interested, you can read the whole letter by following the link to the page down below. But just imagine receiving a letter like that, confirming that your missing child had been butchered and eaten, destroying all hope. Albert Fish was eventually apprehended and executed by electric chair. The Byford Dolphin is a drilling rig made back in 1974 and still in operation today. Now, it's well known that a rig is one of the most dangerous working environments you can find yourself on, and the Dolphin had more than its fair share of deadly incidents. Several fatal occurrences are listed on its Wikipedia page, but one stands out: the diving bell accident. A diving bell is essentially a chamber that transports divers to the depths of the ocean. This image depicts the Dolphin's decompression chamber at the moment the accident occurred. D1 and 2 represent 2 British divers in the team. D3 and 4 depict 2 Norwegian team members, and T1 and 2 show the 2 experienced dive tenders. Their chambers were connected to the diving bell by a trunk, sealed by a clamp. To avoid decompression, it was vital that before the tenders removed the clamp, the door to Chamber 1 had to be sealed tight. For unknown reasons, on November 5th, 1983, one of the tenders opened the clamp before Truls Hellevik, who's represented by Diver 4 in the diagram, could fully seal the door shut. The result was an explosive decompression. The diving bell was blown off, instantly killing the tender who released the clamp. Air rushed out of the chamber at an extreme force, and the pressure inside the chamber dropped from 9 atm to 1 in a fraction of a second. The result? Hellevik was sucked through an opening no more than 60 centimeters in diameter. He was violently dismembered. All of his internal organs were expelled from his chest and abdomen as he was forced through the small hole. They were later found up to 10 meters vertically above the other side of the door. The only parts of him left on the inside were his trachea, a section of small intestine, and parts of the thoracic spine. All 3 of the other divers died instantly as well. Their lives snuffed out in the time it takes to click your fingers. Their blood boiled inside of them. Undoubtedly, there are far more disgusting execution methods to read about online, but this one stands out as being completely overkill. When blown from a gun, the victim is tied to a cannon with his back to the muzzle. The cannon is then fired, blowing the person's torso out of existence. One man who witnessed this execution method, George Carter Stent, described the process. When the gun is fired, his head is seen to go straight up into the air some 40 or 50 feet. The arms fly off right and left, high up in the air, and fall at perhaps 100 yards distance. The legs drop straight to the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun, and the body is literally blown away altogether, not a vestige being seen. Sometimes this would go wrong, with shards of bone flying out from the victim's torso at a high velocity, hitting onlookers and cutting into their flesh. This method of execution was mostly used by British troops in India. At a period in history where death by firing squad would seem like a far more pragmatic approach, some sick bugger said, "Let's tie those guys to a cannon and see what happens." Well, now we know for sure. Back to World War II now. The Nanking Massacre is one of history's most haunting and bloody occurrences, and the details and photos found on the Wikipedia page are enough to make anyone's blood boil. In December 1937, Japanese forces captured the city of Nanking in eastern China. Over a 6-week period, unthinkable war crimes took place. Girls of all ages were raped, often to death. Japanese officers held massacre competitions, just to find out who could kill the most innocent civilians with a sword. People were buried alive, just for kicks. 1/3 of the city was burned to the ground, and executions took place on an industrial scale. As many as 300,000 people were murdered. Other than detailing the events of the massacre, what makes this page truly chilling are some of the photographs you'll find while scrolling down. Some of them too graphic to show here, such as the body of a dead child left in the dirt. A picture of a young boy battered to death by the butt of a rifle, just for refusing to take off his hat. A woman penetrated to death with a bayonet. Rivers of corpses. And this image of a prisoner, moments before being beheaded. It would be decades before Japan formally recognized the massacre, after denying that it had ever happened. This final Wikipedia article chronicles what scientists predict will happen to our planet, and indeed our universe, in the next few billion years. Although not overtly creepy, there's something oddly macabre about the entire list. The further down you read, the more you're reminded just how fragile we are as a species, how little impact we actually have in the grand scheme of things, and how humanity probably won't exist for as long as we'd like to believe. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Happy October as well, everyone's favourite month over here, eh? Anyway, this was just a small collection of pages that I found morbidly interesting. Any articles you would have included? Well, let me know, and I'll have some more videos coming your way very, very soon. I won't waffle this time, guys. So stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. I sleepwalk almost nightly, and occasionally have very intense sleep paralysis episodes. This particular experience bothered me. I was lucid in the dream, so I was consciously analysing what was occurring. I was alone inside this house, and conjuring up different animals that would walk through the front door. It was fun. All kinds of small mammals were running around, looking silly, and I was enjoying the euphoric, lucid feeling. Then, all of the animals suddenly ran from the house, and this awful fear overcame me. I knew something was behind me. I turned around, and it was this grotesque, diminutive, half-Indian child, half-old woman, just standing in the doorway, staring at me. It's hard to explain. When I made eye contact, I immediately went into sleep paralysis with intense vibrations, and I couldn't move. It had this tiny, unnatural smirk, like it knew every single thing about me, and it could easily harm me if it chose to. I had an overwhelming feeling it had invaded my dream and didn't belong there, and I felt extremely helpless. My eyes opened up to my actual room. I was still crushed by the sleep paralysis, and I slipped back into the dream, where I was laying on the floor of the empty house, and the thing was gone. The animals came back in, and I tried to get back into the zone of enjoying the dream. but I couldn't shake the fear of that odd thing. It ended up showing up again. The cycle of sleep paralysis repeated, and it bothered me even more the second time. The third time it happened, when I saw that thing, which was always standing in a doorway inside the empty house. Instead of rejecting the horror of it, I decided I wanted to face it dead on. So I just stared as deeply into its ugly eyes as I could. My perspective basically zoomed into its eyes, to the point where they filled my entire vision, and I was focusing on the pitch black of its pupils. The deadness of its eyes was extremely disconcerting, but only because it gave me the impression of intelligence. I felt only slightly more comfortable after staring into its eyes, because the previous alternative was just thinking, "Shit, don't look at me." Either way, I snapped out of it, and was able to open my eyes again and slowly regain the ability to move. I'm a grown man, and I'm not easily scared, ever. But for about a week, I couldn't stop thinking about this thing. The concept of it fucked me up to the point where I was unnerved when I was alone, or in the dark. I won't say it's inexplicable, but it still freaks me out, and I hate it when it happens. At times, when I'm stressed, I get absolutely chronic sleep paralysis. Basically, where you're still dreaming, but believe you're awake, and though your mind is ticking, your body hasn't fully woken up yet, so you're unable to move. You can also hallucinate that a tormentor is responsible for this temporary paralysis. Everyone has their own tormentors. It could be an imp, a vampire. Mine's the woman from The Grudge, or Samara from The Ring. Basically, a woman in a white dress moving very erratically, with long black hair covering her face. After what seems like a lifetime, you jolt back awake as your body breaks out of the paralysis. Most times you can just realize it was a dream and try to go back to sleep. It usually manifests itself into a real-world setting where I'm sleeping, so I feel like I'm laying down on my bed, and the ghost woman will appear from a wardrobe, or through my door, or at the foot of my bed, and start to make her way towards me. One time, around an important exam I was having, she came from under my bed, making that grating noise and maintaining eye contact the whole time. I basically thought I was frozen with fear. I couldn't move an inch. She continued really slowly making her way towards me, and when she was about an inch from my face, I snapped out of it. I thought I got out of bed to shake myself out of it. It felt so much like I was awake. But as I moved for the door, I started to get lower and lower to the ground until I was laying on it, and once again was unable to move. Now, while I lay on the floor, she emerged again from under the bed, coming straight towards me, except this time I felt like I was really awake. I woke up just before she got to me, and turned on every light, and went straight out onto the balcony to get cold, and make sure I really was awake this time. Didn't sleep for about 2 days after that. My partner suffers from sleep paralysis. We've been together for about 5 years, so I've heard all about it, and I can recognize it when it's happening to him. Normally, I'm asleep, of course, but I've woken up several times when it's happening, and I tell him. His eyes are open, and he breathes extremely heavily. Sometimes his head shakes or his jaw clenches. I can wake him up during these episodes by shaking him. He prefers if I do. The episodes sound terrifying, But I've personally never encountered sleep paralysis. Nothing paranormal either, until this encounter. I work in healthcare, and sometimes have to leave close to 4 AM. I'm kind of paranoid about oversleeping and missing work, and I think this stress causes me to frequently wake up in the middle of the night to check the time. One evening I woke up and looked at the clock. It was close to 2 AM. Relieved I could sleep a little longer, I rolled back over. I could hear my partner breathing heavily on the outside of the bed. I was on the inside, and the dog was between us. At this point, I became aware of this low-voiced whispering. I had no idea what it was saying, but had lots of S-sounding words in it. I don't remember having any thoughts of what it might have been, besides thinking that my significant other was having an episode and trying to speak. I turn around to attempt to wake him up. The first thing I notice is that his eyes are closed, which was odd, because they're normally open, at least when he's having an episode. Right after, I became immediately aware that something was standing over the top of him, on the other side of the bed. I wish I could properly describe the adrenaline rush that ran over me. I've never felt such a rush of fear like that in my entire life. It was an extremely tall, black shadow. It was a humanoid shape, but had much thinner, longer limbs. I looked up, and it was literally as tall as the ceiling, which is at least 10 feet. In fact, its head appeared to be hunched over because it was too tall for the room. Its eyes were large and radiated red, like a coil on an oven instead of a light. I sit up, and my first reaction was to wake my dog. He's a 90-pound pit, who, I should note, never barks. He was curled in between us, and I could feel him snap to attention. I honestly didn't want to take my eyes off the thing, so I'm not sure if he was staring at it or just in the general direction I was looking. I couldn't make out any features other than the eyes on the thing, but I could definitely tell it was staring at me. It slowly backs away, never turning around, and hunches down and out the open bedroom door. The whole experience was probably 10 to 15 seconds. I immediately shake awake my significant other. He tells me that he was having an episode in which the entire room was full of shadow people speaking to him, saying things like, "You're going to die." He said he could feel and see when I sat up. When I told him what I saw, I could tell he was absolutely terrified. What the hell was that? How could I have possibly seen something that my partner was experiencing during an episode of sleep paralysis? It's been a couple of months since that incident, and I haven't seen anything since. Anyone else experience something like this? I haven't experienced sleep paralysis in a long time. Honestly, I didn't think it would be a big deal, but last night it was. My partner and I were laying next to each other, and all of a sudden I start waking up. Our bodies were on our sides, facing each other. I went to cuddle him, and realized I couldn't move. That's when the hallucination began. Behind my partner was an incredibly old woman. Her skin was wrinkled and translucent. I started to remind myself that she wasn't real, but as I began to, she started walking towards the bed. Now, our bed is a canopy up against the wall in a corner, and I'm on the inside, so essentially, even if I wanted to, I couldn't run. The panic started to set in when she started crawling over my partner, and his eyes shot open. I thought for a split second that he could see her too, but I guess in reality I started hyperventilating and woke him up. He started shouting my name, but I couldn't move, and she was over him and reaching for my throat. In one swift motion, my partner scooped me up and pulled me in, and started rocking me back and forth, saying it was okay. At that point, everything stopped, and the scream I had been holding in came out. Yeah, that was embarrassing to talk about. Don't worry, I wasn't dying, just seeing a dead woman trying to strangle me. The old hag, as she's usually referred to, is quite a common sighting for people who experience sleep paralysis. Maybe you've seen her too. My girlfriend suffers from pretty intense night terrors and sleep paralysis, and has done since she was a kid. Usually they're about a shadow man at the foot of her bed, or snakes in her room. It gets to the point where she scares herself so badly, she bruises herself while dreaming. She's had some small terrors before, and I'm usually able to calm her down quickly, convince her that nothing's really there, and she just goes back to sleep. We recently celebrated Valentine's Day by getting a hotel room, along with some pizza, some candy, and some beer, and just relaxed the night away. Everything went great, and when we finally go to sleep, I'm out like a light. 15 minutes after I pass out, she whispers quietly, "There's someone in the room with us. I can see him. He's right there." Now, this hotel wasn't exactly the nicest, and it wasn't in the best area, but I had felt safe. I assumed it was just another one of her night terrors. She then starts screaming that he's coming closer, so at this point I bolt awake, and it's much, much darker in the room than it was when I went to bed. I flick the light on, and no one's there, but my girlfriend is sobbing, curled up on the bed. With my heart racing, but still unconcerned, I checked the room to calm her down. I checked everywhere, including under the bed. When I went into the bathroom, my blood went cold. The window was open about 3 inches, when I specifically remembered closing it before I went to bed, and neither one of us had got up during the night. I didn't tell her about the window, cuddled her close, and didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. I made sure that the knife I keep in my emergency kit was well within reach on the nightstand. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Sorry about the lack of videos this October. I've actually been pretty sick these past few days with a swollen throat, but today it seems to have gotten a bit better, so that's good I guess. But if you thought I sounded a little different in this video, that's probably why. It's kind of screwed up my schedule a bit for this month, but I'm gonna try and make up for the lost time, and pump out a couple more videos as quick as I can. We'll see what happens, we'll see. Anyway, for my throat's sake, I'm not gonna keep prattling on. So I'll just end it as always with you stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.